I never believed that one misplaced finger tap could unravel 15 years of marriage, expose a web of lies that stretched back to before I even knew my husband existed, and reveal that the man sleeping next to me every night was someone I had never truly met. But here I am, sitting in my car outside what used to be our home, staring at the screenshots on my phone that prove everything I thought I knew about my life was a carefully constructed illusion. It started with something so mundane, so ridiculously simple, that I almost laugh when I think about it now. A work email, a forward button, and a split second of distraction that changed absolutely everything. You know that moment when you realize you've made a mistake, but it's already too late to take it back. When your finger hits send and your stomach drops, because you know something terrible is about to happen. I thought I knew what terrible looked like. I thought the worst case scenario was maybe an awkward conversation with my boss about boundaries, or perhaps a mildly embarrassing explanation about accidentally sharing work drama with my husband. I was so incredibly, devastatingly wrong. The note I accidentally forwarded to David wasn't just any work correspondence. It was a message from my boss, Mr. Richardson, that contained details about a situation at our company that I never should have seen, let alone shared. But what happened next, what David said, what David did, what David revealed about himself in those first 30 seconds after reading that message, that's what shattered my world into pieces so small I'm not sure they can ever be put back together. Because it turns out that when you accidentally expose one secret, it has a way of unraveling all the other secrets that have been hiding in plain sight. And my husband, the man I married, the father of our 2 children, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world, had been keeping secrets that went so much deeper than anything I could have imagined. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, exactly what that note said, and exactly how my husband's reaction revealed the truth about who he really is. But I need you to understand something first. This isn't just a story about a mistake. This is a story about betrayal, about deception, and about discovering that the person you love most in the world has been playing a game you didn't even know existed. I should probably start at the beginning, or at least what I thought was the beginning back when I still believed in beginnings and endings, and the simple progression of a normal life. My name is Sarah, I'm 38 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I worked as a senior project coordinator for Mitchell & Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Portland. I'd been there for 8 years, ever since we moved to Oregon, when David got his promotion at the tech company, where he worked as a software engineer. We were that couple, you know. The one that other people looked at and thought we had it all figured out, married for 15 years, together for 17. 2 kids, Emma, who's 13 and basically a carbon copy of David with her dark hair and serious eyes, and Jake, who's 10 and inherited my tendency to talk too much and laugh too loud. We had a house in Beaverton with a mortgage that stressed us out but wasn't unmanageable, 2 car payments, a golden retriever named Buddy, and all the comfortable, predictable chaos of a suburban family trying to balance work and school schedules and weekend soccer games. David traveled for work sometimes, maybe once or twice a month, usually just for a few days at a time. He'd been doing it for years, and I'd gotten used to managing the kids' schedules solo during those stretches. He was good about staying in touch when he was away, texting throughout the day, video calls with the kids before bedtime, bringing back small gifts from whatever city he'd visited. I trusted him completely. Not just about the travel, but about everything. He was steady, reliable David who paid the bills on time, and never forgot to take out the trash, and always remembered our anniversary. That's the thing about long marriages, they create their own rhythm, their own sense of security. You stop questioning the small things because the big picture feels so solid. When David said he had to go to Seattle for 3 days to meet with a client, I barely looked up from helping Jake with his math homework. When he mentioned he'd be working late on a project deadline, I just reminded him to eat something and went back to folding laundry. We were comfortable with each other in that deep, unsexy way that comes after years of sharing a bathroom and splitting mortgage payments and taking turns dealing with stomach flu at 2 a.m. I loved that comfort. I thought it was what marriage was supposed to become, not the desperate intensity of early romance, but something steadier and more real. Partnership, trust, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing someone so well you can predict their reactions, their preferences, their patterns. Which is why Mr. Richardson's note was so jarring when I first read it. Not because of what it revealed about my boss. I'd already suspected he was dealing with some personal issues that were affecting his judgment at work. But because of what it implied about David, and about things I thought I understood that apparently I didn't understand at all. The note came on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, halfway through my second cup of coffee, trying to prioritize a project timeline that seemed to change every time someone new looked at it. My phone buzzed with a text from David saying he'd be working late again, and I replied with a quick, "Okay, love you," before diving back into spreadsheets and deadline calculations. That's when Mr. Richardson's email appeared in my inbox, marked urgent, with a subject line that made my stomach clench. Confidential, need your discretion. I clicked on the email, expecting maybe another crisis about budget overruns or client complaints. Mr. Richardson had been increasingly erratic lately, making decisions that didn't quite make sense, having hushed phone conversations that stopped abruptly when people walked by his office, canceling meetings at the last minute with vague explanations about personal matters. The whole office had noticed, but nobody talked about it directly. That's corporate culture for you, everyone pretending not to see the obvious, while privately speculating about what was really going on. But the email I opened that Tuesday morning was unlike anything I'd ever received from him before. It wasn't about work at all. It was personal, raw, and so completely inappropriate for a boss to send to an employee that I felt my face flush just reading the first paragraph. Sarah, it began. I know this is completely unprofessional, and I apologize for involving you in my personal affairs, but I don't have anyone else I can trust with this information. I've been dealing with a situation that has spiraled completely out of control, and I need someone who understands the importance of discretion. The rest of the note laid out a story that was part confession, part cry for help, and part warning. Mr. Richardson had been having an affair. Not just any affair, but one that had turned into something much more complicated and dangerous than he'd anticipated. The woman he was involved with had a husband who had discovered the relationship and was threatening to expose everything, not just to Mr. Richardson's wife, but to our company's board of directors, to our clients, to anyone who would listen. But here's where it got truly bizarre. The woman's husband worked in tech, had connections throughout the Portland business community, and had somehow obtained detailed information about Mr. Richardson's financial dealings, both personal and professional. He was using this information as leverage, demanding money, threatening to destroy Mr. Richardson's career and reputation if he didn't comply with increasingly unreasonable demands. The worst part, Mr. Richardson wrote, is that this man seems to know things about me, about my business relationship, about confidential company information that he shouldn't have any way of knowing. It's like he's been watching me, studying me, for months or maybe even years. I'm starting to think this entire situation was orchestrated from the beginning, that his wife approached me deliberately, that this whole affair was some kind of setup designed to give him access to information he could use against me. I read the email 3 times, my coffee growing cold as I tried to process what my boss was telling me. This wasn't just about an affair gone wrong. This was about corporate espionage, blackmail, and a level of manipulation that felt like something out of a thriller novel, rather than the mundane reality of my Tuesday morning inbox. The note continued with specific details that made my skin crawl. The husband had been systematically gathering information about Mr. Richardson's clients, his business practices, his personal financial situation. He'd somehow accessed confidential emails, sensitive project details, information that should have been protected by multiple layers of security, and he was using all of it to create an increasingly complex web of threats and demands. I think he's done this before, Mr. Richardson wrote. I think this is how he makes money, targeting men in positions of power, using his wife as bait, then leveraging the relationships to extract information and payments. And Sarah, I'm worried that I'm not his only target. I think he's been gathering information about other people at our company, other professionals in the Portland area. This could be much bigger than just my personal situation. That's when I saw the paragraph that made my blood turn to ice. I know this will sound paranoid, but I think he might have connections inside our company. Someone who could access our systems, our client databases, our internal communications. The information he has about me, about our business relationships, about conversations I've had in private meetings, there's no way he could have obtained it from the outside. Sarah, I need you to help me figure out if there's a security breach, if someone on our team is feeding him information, if this situation is even more serious than I thought. And then came the final paragraph, the one that should have been a red flag, should have made me stop and think and proceed with extreme caution. I'm including some documentation that shows the kind of information he has access to. I need you to look at it and tell me if you recognize any patterns, any indicators of how he might be getting this data. And Sarah, please don't share this with anyone, not even your husband. I don't know who I can trust right now, and I can't risk this information getting back to him somehow. The less people who know about this, the safer we'll all be. Attached to the email were screenshots of text messages, copies of what appeared to be internal company documents, and a detailed timeline of events that painted a picture of sophisticated corporate espionage that had been going on for months without anyone noticing. I sat at my desk, staring at these documents, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This was serious. This was potentially criminal, and my boss was asking me to help him investigate a security breach that could affect our entire company. That's when I made the mistake. I was thinking about David, about how he worked in tech, about how he might have insights into the kind of security vulnerabilities Mr. Richardson was describing. David understood systems and data access and the ways that information could be compromised. He could help me figure out if Mr. Richardson's suspicions were justified, could maybe offer advice about how to trace the source of the leak. Without thinking it through, without remembering Mr. Richardson's explicit instruction, not to share the information with anyone, without considering the potential consequences, I hit the forward button. I meant to forward the email to myself at my personal account so I could read it more carefully at home, and maybe ask David for his technical expertise in general terms, without revealing the specific details about Mr. Richardson's situation. Instead, because I was distracted, because I was thinking about 3 different things at once, Because my fingers moved faster than my brain, I forwarded the entire email, with all its attachments, directly to David's phone. The moment I hit send, I realized what I'd done. My stomach dropped, my hand started shaking, and I felt that particular kind of panic that comes with knowing you've just made a mistake that can't be undone. I grabbed my phone and called David immediately. "Hey babe," he answered on the second ring, sounding relaxed and happy. "What's up?" "David, I just made a huge mistake," I said, my voice tight with anxiety. "I accidentally forwarded you an email from work, something confidential that you shouldn't see. Can you please delete it without reading it? It's really important." There was a pause. A long, strange pause that should have been filled with David asking me what happened, reassuring me that mistakes happen, maybe even making a joke about how I was always worried about things that weren't as serious as I thought they were. Instead, when he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. "Too late," he said, and there was something in his tone that I'd never heard before. Something cold and calculating and almost amused. "I already read it. And Sarah, we need to talk." The line went dead. David had hung up on me. In 15 years of marriage, through arguments about money and stress about the kids and disagreements about everything from vacation destinations to disciplinary strategies, David had never once hung up on me. He was the type of person who talked things through, who stayed on the phone until we'd resolved whatever issue we were dealing with, who believed in communication and working things out like adults. But he just hung up on me after reading that email, and his voice when he said, "We need to talk," didn't sound like my husband at all. It sounded like someone else entirely. I tried calling him back immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I sent a text, "David, please call me back. I can explain about the email." No response. I couldn't concentrate on work for the rest of the day. Every few minutes I checked my phone, hoping for a message from David, some explanation for his strange reaction. But there was nothing. Radio silence from the man who usually texted me throughout the day about random thoughts, funny things that happened at work, reminders about grocery lists and soccer practice schedules. By lunchtime, I was starting to feel genuinely worried. Not just about David's reaction to the email, but about what his reaction might mean. Why had he sounded so cold? Why had he hung up on me? And what did he mean when he said "too late"? In that tone of voice that suggested he wasn't surprised or confused by the content of Mr. Richardson's message, but rather, satisfied, like he'd been waiting for something exactly like this to happen. I left work early, claiming a family emergency that felt more real by the hour. During the 20-minute drive home, I tried to prepare myself for what might be a difficult conversation. Maybe David was angry that I'd shared confidential work information, even accidentally. Maybe he was worried about the legal implications of having access to something I shouldn't have forwarded to him. Maybe he was just stressed about his own work situation and had overreacted to what was essentially a simple mistake. But when I pulled into our driveway and saw that David's car was already there, 2 hours before he usually got home from work, I felt that cold grip of real fear settle in my chest. I walked into our house, the same house we'd lived in for 8 years, and immediately sensed that something was fundamentally wrong. Not wrong like furniture had been moved or things were broken, but wrong in a way that made the familiar space feel foreign and threatening. "David," I called out, setting my purse and keys on the kitchen counter where I'd set them thousands of times before. "Are you here?" "In the living room," came his voice, and again there was that strange tone, that quality that didn't sound like the man I'd married. I found him sitting on our couch where we'd watched countless movies and helped the kids with homework, and had lazy Sunday morning conversations about nothing important. But he wasn't sitting the way David usually sat. He was positioned formally, almost professionally, with his back straight and his hands folded in his lap like he was conducting a business meeting. On the coffee table in front of him were several stacks of papers, a laptop I didn't recognize, and my phone, which I'd left at home that morning, and which should have been upstairs on my nightstand, where I always left it to charge during the day. "Sit down, Sarah," he said, gesturing to the chair across from the couch, not the spot next to him where I usually sat, not the casual invitation to curl up together that had been our routine for years, but a formal direction to sit in a specific place like I was about to be interrogated. I sat down, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears, and looked at the man who was my husband but who somehow wasn't behaving like my husband at all. "David, about that email," I started to say. "Stop," he interrupted, holding up one hand. "Before you say anything else, before you try to explain or apologize or minimize what happened, I need you to understand that everything is different now. Everything we've been pretending for the last 15 years is over." Pretending? What did he mean pretending? "I don't understand," I said, and I genuinely didn't. "What are you talking about? What's pretending?" David smiled, and it was the most terrifying smile I'd ever seen. It wasn't cruel or angry, it was almost affectionate, like he was proud of me for asking exactly the right question. "You forwarded me an email about a situation that your boss thinks is corporate espionage," he said, picking up one of the stacks of papers from the coffee table, "about a man who's been systematically targeting professionals in the Portland area, using his wife to initiate affairs that give him access to sensitive business information that he then uses for blackmail and financial gain." I nodded, not sure where this was going but feeling increasingly uneasy about the direction of the conversation. Your boss thinks someone inside your company is helping this man access confidential information. David continued, he thinks there's a security breach, someone feeding data to an outside party who's using it to destroy people's careers and reputations. Yes, I said quietly. That's what the email was about. David's smile widened. Sarah, do you want to know why I hung up on you when you called me this morning? I nodded, afraid to speak. Because I was laughing, he said. Because after 17 years of you being completely oblivious to what I actually do for a living, you accidentally sent me evidence of my own operation. The words didn't make sense. I heard them, but they seemed to bounce off my brain without connecting to any meaningful understanding. Operation? What operation? David, I don't. My name isn't David Sullivan. He said calmly like he was telling me what he wanted for dinner. Well, it is now, legally, because I've been using it for 18 years, and it's easier to maintain an identity when you commit to it completely. But it wasn't always my name. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to tell me this was some kind of joke, to explain that he was upset about something else entirely, and was taking it out on me in the most bizarre way possible. Instead, he opened the laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a detailed spreadsheet with names, dates, financial figures, and what appeared to be a comprehensive record of multiple ongoing dark projects, operations. I couldn't immediately understand what I was looking at, but I could see Mr. Richardson's name highlighted in yellow about halfway down the list. I've been doing this for 23 years, David said, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a complex but fascinating hobby. Since before I met you, since before we got married, since before Emma and Jake were born. Corporate espionage, specifically targeting mid-level executives at consulting firms, tech companies, and financial services organizations in medium-sized cities throughout the Pacific Northwest. I felt like I was falling, like the floor had disappeared beneath my chair and I was tumbling through space without anything solid to grab onto. The way it works is actually quite simple. David continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that I was having some kind of psychological breakdown. I identify targets based on their access to valuable information and their vulnerability to certain types of social manipulation. Then Rebecca, who is my business partner, not some random woman having an affair, approaches them in contexts where a relationship can develop naturally. Rebecca. He said the name like I should know who he was talking about, like this was a normal part of our family conversation. Rebecca initiates relationships with these men, gains their trust, accesses their personal and professional communications, and then I use that information to generate revenue through various channels. Sometimes it's direct blackmail, sometimes it's insider trading based on confidential business information. Sometimes it's identity theft or credit fraud using data we've collected from their personal accounts. He was describing criminal activity, systematic, organized, ongoing criminal activity that he'd been conducting for our entire marriage, using our home as a base of operations, financing our family's life with money he'd stolen from people like my boss. But Sarah, he said, leaning forward slightly, the really elegant part of the system is the inside information. See, it's much more efficient when you have someone on the inside of these organizations who can provide access to internal communications, client databases, financial records, strategic plans. Someone who works there, who has legitimate access to sensitive information, who can gather intelligence without raising suspicions. I was going to be sick. Actually, physically sick. I could feel bile rising in my throat as I began to understand what he was telling me. Someone like a senior project coordinator who's been working at Mitchell & Associates for 8 years. He said softly, someone who has access to client files and internal communications and confidential project details, someone who's married to me and would never suspect that her husband was using information she brought home from work to destroy people's lives. The room started spinning. I gripped the arms of the chair, trying to anchor myself to something real while my entire understanding of my life, my marriage, my family, myself, crumbled into pieces around me. Sarah, you've been helping me target people at your company for years without knowing it, David said, and his voice was almost gentle now, almost kind. Every time you complained about Mr. Richardson's behavior at work, every time you mentioned a client's personal issues or financial problems, every time you brought home stories about office politics or workplace drama, you were giving me intelligence that I used to identify potential targets and develop strategies for approaching them. I tried to speak, tried to ask questions, tried to scream, but no sound came out of my throat. And the beautiful thing is, David continued, you did it all voluntarily. I never had to ask you to spy on your coworkers or steal confidential information. You just shared things with your husband the way wives do. You told me about your day, complained about difficult people at work, mentioned interesting projects and client situations, and I filed it all away and used it to build profiles of potential targets. He reached over and touched my hand, the same gesture he'd made thousands of times during our marriage, but now it felt like ice against my skin. You've been my most valuable asset, Sarah, not just for the information but for the cover story. A happily married software engineer with a wife and 2 kids in the suburbs, involved in soccer leagues and school fundraisers, living a completely normal middle-class life. It's the perfect camouflage for this kind of operation. I don't remember how I got out of that chair, how I made it to my car, how I managed to drive to the police station without crashing into something. The next several hours exist in my memory as a series of disconnected images, detective interviews, legal forms, phone calls to my parents, arrangements for the kids to stay with my sister until this situation could be resolved. David, or whatever his real name is, was arrested that evening. Rebecca too, along with 3 other people who were apparently part of their network. The FBI found evidence of at least 47 victims across 6 states, financial crimes totaling more than $3 million, and a database of stolen personal information that included hundreds of names, social security numbers, and confidential business documents. Richardson's case was just the most recent in a pattern that had been going on for more than 2 decades. And I had been providing intelligence for their operation without knowing it for 8 years of my marriage. The man I thought was my husband, the father of my children, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, had been using me as an unwitting accomplice in a criminal enterprise that destroyed people's lives and careers. Every conversation we'd ever had about my work, every casual mention of coworker drama or client issues, every piece of information I'd shared about my professional life had been weaponized against innocent people. I'm staying in a hotel now while the legal proceedings continue. Emma and Jake are with my parents, trying to process the fact that their father is not who they thought he was, that their entire family history is built on lies and criminal activity. The house, the cars, their college funds, all of it purchased with stolen money, all of it evidence in an ongoing federal investigation. But here's what haunts me the most. I keep thinking about that moment when I accidentally forwarded the email, when David's voice changed completely, when he said, "Too late," like he'd been waiting for this to happen. I think he wanted to get caught. I think after 23 years of living a lie, he was ready for the truth to come out. What would you do if you discovered your entire marriage was part of someone else's criminal operation? Should I have seen the signs? Comment below and let me know, could this happen to anyone, or was I just blind to who he really was?